What does this make you feel? Dreamy? Or is it spooky? Today, we're going to talk about the whole tone scale, which became commonly used in the Western world in the last century and was known for its spooky or dreamy feel. How did it make its way into Western music, and why does it make us feel that way? First of all, let's look at what the whole tone scale is. From its name, a whole tone scale, well, it's a scale with whole tones, and only whole tones. When we look at the major scale, for example, it consists of whole tones and semitones, also known as whole steps and half steps, following the pattern of whole whole half, whole 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 half. When we transpose the scale to start at different pitches, the pattern of the whole and half steps remain the same. In other words, to get the major scale starting from any pitch, we simply use the pattern whole whole half, whole 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 half to get the scale. Now, when it comes to the whole tone scale, we are looking at only whole steps. So instead of having two half steps in the scale, we're going to have a whole step. The result is a scale with all whole steps, no half steps, and due to the greater distance between notes, we have one less note than the major scale, as it only takes 6 whole steps to get to the next octave. So if we were to start the scale from C, we would get C, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, and back to C. When you play it faster, it sounds like a flashback effect, which you might be familiar with. And also in lots of games where there is something mysterious or magical happening, such as in the new Super Mario Wii game, when the Magic Koopa appears before each boss fight. So, what does this sort of sound make you feel? Is it spooky, dreamy, or even magical? Well, I don't think a scale alone can determine the mood of a piece. It depends a lot on the music as well. The way notes are arranged in the scale, the music's timbre and texture, all these things contribute to how we as listeners shape an emotional response to the music. But that being said, I think the range of emotions conveyed by the whole tone scale can be summarized as something rather unsettling. Whether it's spooky, dreamy, magical, or unsettling, it seems like we are unable to feel comfortable or at ease when we hear music in this scale. So why does the whole tone scale give us this kind of unsettling mood? To answer that, we'll have to go a little bit back into history and also to the beginning of this video when you heard me play the piece Voix by Debussy. You see, when Debussy wrote that piece, the whole tone scale, together with the other so-called exotic scales such as the pentatonic scale, was getting more popular in Western music. The idea of exoticism was trending in Europe as people were fascinated by art and culture distant from them. European composers experimented beyond the conventional major and minor scales and adopted other scales which they deemed to be exotic, as they tend to depict a sense of mystery and fantasy. As a result, the Western perception of the whole tone scale is something that sounds foreign, distant, and mysterious. In the following decades, the whole tone scale made its way into the film industry and was heavily employed in the 1930s and 40s, especially in horror and thriller films. It was so heavily used to the extent that it became a cliché for suspenseful moments in films. This kind of perception of the whole tone scale lasts even until today, given that most of us are still used to listening to music based on major and minor scales. which explains the distant and unfamiliar feeling we still get from the whole tone scale. Well, that's the history part. You must be thinking, surely there are other things about the whole tone scale itself that makes it sound so special. And that's when we have to go into more music theory. Previously, we've established that the whole tone scale consists exclusively of whole tones. The result is a scale with equal distance between all its notes, a scale that is perfectly symmetrical. This contrasts with, say, major scales, which tend to have asymmetrical interval patterns. And it's precisely this asymmetry that provides the major scale with reference points for the listener to identify where the tonic or the key center is. When we go up the major scale, we can anticipate the key center due to the presence of tendency tones, particularly the seventh note of the scale here, known as the leading tone, which tends to resolve to the tonic. Another factor that gives major and minor scales their stability is the presence of the perfect fifth as the stable dominant, or the fifth note of the scale. The dominant can be thought as a complement to the tonic, as a 5-to-1 chord progression is the strongest way you could establish the tonic. However, in the case of the whole tone scale, its perfectly symmetrical structure ironically makes it very unstable as there is no reference point for a key center, no tendency tones, and no perfect fifth that can be found between any two notes in the scale. And now, there's another feature that gives the whole tone scale its quality. Imagine the major scale. If we transpose it, or bring the tonic to another note, it becomes a new key, right? Say a major scale starting in C is C major, a major scale starting on D is D major, and they are different keys because they don't have the same set of notes. Now, let's try doing this to the whole tone scale. So a whole tone scale starting on C has these notes. Let's bring the starting note a semitone higher to C sharp, and we get this scale, which has a completely different set of notes. Okay, let's try bringing it up one more, now to D. What do you notice about this scale? Well, it has exactly the same set of notes as the scale starting on C. In fact, when we transpose the whole tone scale to other starting notes, we realize that there are in fact only two whole tone scales. This phenomenon is known as modes of limited transposition, a term first coined by the French composer Olivier Messiaen. There are other scales with the same kind of symmetry as the whole tone scale, but it is the very symmetry that restricts the number of transposition a scale can have. In the case of the whole tone scale, it is the scale with the least number of unique transpositions, with only 2. When navigating the whole tone scale, I like to imagine this as a person entering a maze filled with mirrors, and when they try to go somewhere else, they seem to always end up in the same room over and over again. So when we transpose something in the whole tone scale, we will often get the same scale back, as every interval is exactly the same and there is never any note that we can rely on that tells us where we are. No dominant, no tonic. Therefore, any attempt to create melodies or harmonic progressions within the scale will produce a floating, ethereal, and kind of unsettling effect. When these effects are put into the context of the subject matter, often something to do with the magical, the supernatural, or the unknown, the overall mood of the music can become rather dreamy or spooky. Okay, I think that's enough music theory for today, but I hope this gives you a clearer idea of the whole tone scale and somewhat explains the way we perceive it. If you would like to share other instances where the whole tone scale is used, do leave a comment below, as I'll be curious to know as well. And of course, if you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more music related content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.